The trial of Marcus Rothwell began on a cold February morning in 2025. The federal courthouse was packed with reporters, victims, and curious citizens who wanted to see justice served. Outside, protesters held signs demanding the maximum sentence for the man who had destroyed so many lives. Marcus sat at the defendant's table looking nothing like the confident banker he had once been. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by a cheap gray outfit provided by his public defender. His hair had turned gray during the months of stress. He had lost weight and looked older than his 58 years. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had bank records, audio recordings, witness testimony, and Marcus's own words bragging about his crimes. The evidence was so strong that Marcus's lawyer advised him to plead guilty and hope for mercy from the judge. But Marcus refused to plead guilty. Even facing a mountain of evidence, he still believed he could somehow escape responsibility for his actions. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Every day brought new evidence of Marcus's crimes. The prosecution showed how he had systematically targeted vulnerable families, tricked them into impossible loans, and stolen their property through rigged auctions. Thomas Henderson was the prosecution's star witness. He testified for 2 full days about how Marcus had destroyed his family. Thomas spoke clearly and calmly, telling the jury about his wife's illness, his desperate attempts to save the farm, and how Marcus had manipulated him into signing a contract designed to fail. Marcus Rothwell looked me in the eye and promised to help me, Thomas told the jury. He said the bank wanted farmers to succeed, but he was lying. He wanted me to fail so he could steal my land. Thomas also testified about the aftermath of losing his farm, how his wife's health had deteriorated from the stress, how they had lost their home, their livelihood, and their dignity, how they had been forced to depend on charity just to survive. The jury was clearly moved by Thomas's testimony. Several jurors wiped away tears as Thomas described watching his dying wife worry about where they would live. Other victims testified as well. Maria Santos, the single mother who had lost her farm because she could not read the English contract Marcus had tricked her into signing. David Kim, the veteran who had lost his farm while serving overseas. Jim Watson, whose elderly father had died of a heart attack after being evicted from his family's home. Each story was heartbreaking. Each story showed how Marcus had taken advantage of people in crisis for his own profit. The defense had no real answer to this testimony. Marcus's lawyer tried to argue that his client was just following standard banking practices. He tried to claim that the victims should have read their contracts more carefully, but the jury was not fooled. They could see that Marcus had deliberately deceived desperate people. They could see that he had made millions of dollars by destroying innocent families. The most damaging evidence came from Marcus himself. The prosecution played recordings of Marcus bragging about his crimes to other bankers. The jury heard Marcus's own voice describing how easy it was to cheat farmers and how much money he had made from their suffering. Marcus's lawyer tried to claim the recordings were taken out of context, but there was no way to explain away Marcus's words. These farmers are so desperate they'll sign anything. It's like taking candy from a baby. The trial also revealed the full extent of Marcus's embezzlement from the bank. Federal accountants testified that Marcus had stolen over $2 million from customer accounts and bank funds. He had used this money to buy luxury items while his victims struggled to pay for food and medical care. As the trial progressed, Marcus seemed to shrink in his chair. The weight of evidence was crushing. The testimony of his victims was devastating. The recordings of his own words were damning. When the prosecution rested their case, Marcus's lawyer made a final attempt to save his client. He argued that Marcus had a gambling addiction that explained his crimes. He claimed that Marcus was sorry for what he had done and deserved a second chance, but the jury was not interested in excuses. They had heard too much evidence of Marcus's calculated cruelty. They had seen too many broken families destroyed by his greed. After just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all 47 counts. Marcus's sentencing hearing was held 3 weeks later. The courtroom was again packed with victims and their families. Many of them had asked to speak before the judge announced Marcus's punishment. Thomas Henderson was the first to address the court. "Your Honor," he said, "Marcus Rothwell didn't just steal money from us. He stole our dreams, our security, and our faith in justice. My wife died believing she was a burden because we lost our home. Marcus Rothwell killed her spirit before cancer killed her body. Thomas's voice broke as he continued. But I don't want revenge. I want justice. I want Marcus Rothwell to go to prison for so long that he can never hurt another family. And I want the money he stole to go back to the people he hurt. One by one, the other victims spoke. They told the judge about lost homes, broken dreams, and children who had to grow up in poverty because of Marcus's greed. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he finally seemed to understand the magnitude of what he had done. For the first time since his arrest, Marcus broke down and cried. "I'm sorry," he said through his tears. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm truly sorry. I became so focused on making money that I forgot these were real people with real families. I destroyed lives for profit, and I will regret that for the rest of my life." But the judge was not impressed by Marcus's tears. Judge Patricia Williams had seen too many criminals cry when they finally faced consequences for their actions. "Mr. Rothwell," Judge Williams said, "you had every advantage in life. You had education, opportunity, and respect. You chose to use those advantages to prey on people who trusted you. You destroyed dozens of families and stole millions of dollars. Your crimes were not mistakes. They were calculated acts of cruelty." Judge Williams sentenced Marcus to 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. She also ordered him to pay full restitution to his victims, over $18 million in total. "You will spend the next 15 years thinking about what you did," Judge Williams told Marcus, "and when you get out, you will spend the rest of your life working to pay back what you stole." As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, Thomas Henderson felt something he had not felt in years: hope. Justice had finally been served, but Thomas was not finished. Over the months following Marcus's conviction, Thomas had become a leader in the fight for banking reform. He worked with members of Congress to pass new laws protecting farmers and other vulnerable borrowers from predatory lending. The Henderson Act, named in honor of Thomas and his late wife Sarah, created strict penalties for banks that engaged in predatory lending. It required clear, simple language in all loan documents. It gave The FBI investigation into Marcus Rothwell's crimes moved quickly once the evidence started flowing. What began as the investigation into predatory lending soon uncovered a web of corruption and theft that shocked even experienced federal agents. Agent Sarah Collins had been investigating financial crimes for 15 years, but she had never seen anything quite like Marcus's operation. The more she dug into his activities, the more crimes she discovered. This man wasn't just cheating farmers, Agent Collins told her supervisor. He was running a criminal enterprise. He was stealing money from the bank itself. The investigation revealed that Marcus had been embezzling funds from First National Bank for over 6 years. He had created fake loan accounts and transferred money to shell companies he controlled. He had approved loans to non-existent businesses and pocketed the money. He had even stolen money from customer accounts, knowing that most people never checked their statements carefully. The total amount Marcus had embezzled was staggering: over $2 million, separate from the money he had made by cheating farmers. Marcus had hidden his stolen money in offshore accounts and investments. He had bought real estate under false names. He had purchased expensive art and jewelry that he kept in secret storage facilities. But Marcus's biggest mistake was getting greedy. As his crimes escalated, he became careless about covering his tracks. Bank employees started noticing irregularities. Customers started asking questions about missing money. The state banking regulators, who had been ignoring problems for years, finally could not ignore the evidence. When federal regulators took control of First National Bank in November, they found the institution was essentially bankrupt. Marcus had stolen so much money that the bank could not meet its obligations to depositors. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation had to step in to protect customers' savings. Taxpayers would ultimately pay millions of dollars to clean up the mess Marcus had created. Marcus's personal life was also falling apart. His wife Linda had initially stood by him when the first newspaper article appeared. She believed his claims that he was being unfairly targeted by jealous competitors. But as evidence of his crimes mounted, Linda began to see her husband for what he really was. The FBI showed her bank records proving that Marcus had been stealing money for years. They showed her evidence that he had destroyed dozens of innocent families for profit. The final straw came when Linda discovered that Marcus had taken out a secret mortgage on their vacation home and stolen the money. He had risked losing everything they owned to feed his greed. "I can't do this anymore," Linda told Marcus one evening in December. "I can't be married to a criminal." Linda filed for divorce the next day. Under state law, she was entitled to half of their assets. But she demanded more than that. She wanted to make sure Marcus could not hide money from his victims. Linda's divorce lawyer worked with federal investigators to identify all of Marcus's assets. Linda agreed to give up her claim to money that had been stolen, but she insisted on keeping the legitimate assets they had acquired before Marcus became a criminal. The divorce was ugly and public. Reporters covered every court hearing. Details of Marcus's crimes and the couple's lavish lifestyle were splashed across newspapers and television screens. Marcus's children also turned against him. His daughter, Rebecca, was a senior in college studying social work. When she learned that her father had destroyed families and made children homeless, she was disgusted. "How could you do this to innocent people?" Rebecca asked her father during one painful phone conversation. "How could you take away children's homes?" Marcus tried to justify his actions. "It was just business, Rebecca. These people signed contracts. I didn't force them to borrow money." "You lied to them," Rebecca shot back. "You tricked them when they were desperate. You're not my father anymore." Rebecca changed her last name and refused to accept any money from Marcus. She also testified before Congress about the impact of predatory lending on families and communities. Marcus's son, Michael, was a lawyer at a prestigious firm in the state capitol. When Marcus's crimes became public, Michael's partners asked him to take a leave of absence. "We can't have the son of a criminal representing our clients," the senior partner explained. "It's bad for business." Michael eventually had to resign from the firm and start his own practice. He lost most of his clients and had to move to a smaller office in a different city. Both of Marcus's children made public statements condemning their father's actions and expressing sympathy for his victims. As 2024 turned into 2025, Marcus found himself completely alone. His wife was divorcing him. His children wanted nothing to do with him. His friends had abandoned him. His colleagues in the banking industry pretended they had never known him. Even worse, Marcus was running out of money. The federal government had frozen all of his known assets while they investigated the sources of his wealth. Marcus could not access his bank accounts, his investments, or the proceeds from selling his properties. Marcus's expensive lawyer demanded payment up front for continuing his defense. When Marcus could not pay, the lawyer withdrew from the case. Marcus had to rely on a public defender, the same type of lawyer that represented the poor people he had always looked down on. The criminal charges against Marcus were serious. The federal government had indicted him on 47 counts of fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and racketeering. If convicted on all counts, Marcus could face over 100 years in prison. The civil lawsuits were even worse. The families Marcus had cheated were suing him for damages. The stockholders of First National Bank were suing him for destroying their investments. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation was suing him to recover the money. Taxpayers had to pay to clean up his mess. The total amount Marcus owed in lawsuits was over $20 million, far more than he had ever stolen. Marcus's mansion was seized by federal marshals in January 2025. His yacht, his cars, his art collection, his jewelry, everything was taken to satisfy his debts. Marcus had to move into a small apartment in a rundown part of town. The man who had once lived like a king was now shopping at thrift stores and eating cheap food. But Marcus's biggest shock came when he learned that Thomas Henderson was leading the effort to reform banking regulations. Thomas had testified before Congress about predatory lending. He had worked with legislators to draft new laws protecting farmers and other vulnerable borrowers. Thomas had turned his personal tragedy into a mission to prevent others from suffering the same fate. "This man destroyed my family," Thomas told a congressional committee. "But I won't let him destroy other families. We need laws with teeth that will put criminals like Marcus Rothwell in prison where they belong." Marcus watched Thomas's testimony on television from his dingy apartment. The man Marcus had thought he had destroyed was now more powerful and respected than Marcus had ever been. As Marcus sat alone in his apartment, eating a frozen dinner and watching his former victim on national television, he finally understood what had happened to him. His greed had not just destroyed other people's lives, it had ultimately destroyed his own life too. Marcus had thought he was too smart to get caught. He had thought he was too important to face consequences. He had thought his money and power would protect him forever, but money and power built on crime are never permanent. Eventually, every criminal faces justice. Eventually, every lie is exposed. Eventually, karma catches up with everyone. Marcus Rothwell was about to learn this lesson in the harshest way possible. 6 months after Marcus Rothwell destroyed Thomas Henderson's life, everything seemed perfect for the crooked banker. Marcus was living in his expanded mansion, sailing his new yacht on weekends and planning his next vacation to Europe. The Henderson farm was now a shopping mall parking lot, and Marcus had pocketed $750,000 from the deal. Meanwhile, Thomas was working 3 part-time jobs just to pay for Sarah's medical treatments. She had grown weaker and spent most days in bed. They lived in a tiny apartment above a grocery store, surviving on charity from their church and help from Sarah's sister. Marcus never thought about Thomas anymore. To Marcus, Thomas had just been a business transaction. Marcus had moved on to targeting his next victim, a dairy farmer whose son had been injured in an accident. But Marcus had made a critical error when he bragged about his crimes to Robert. Since Robert had not forgotten that conversation. In fact, Robert had been investigating Marcus's activities for months, and what he found made him sick. Robert discovered that Marcus had not just cheated 12 farmers. The real number was much higher. Over the past 5 years, Marcus had systematically destroyed at least 30 farming families. He had used the same predatory lending tactics, the same controlled auctions, the same network of shell companies. Marcus had made over $4 million in profit from these schemes. Robert gathered documentation on every case he could find. Loan applications with impossible terms, auction records showing suspicious bidding patterns, property transfers to companies that all traced back to Marcus, bank records showing Marcus transferring millions to his personal accounts. Most damning of all, Robert had recorded his conversation with Marcus at the banking conference. Marcus's own voice bragging about how he cheated desperate farmers and destroyed their families. Robert took all this evidence to his friend Jessica Martinez, an investigative journalist who worked for the State Tribune, the largest newspaper in the region. Jessica had won awards for exposing corruption in government and business. "This is incredible," Jessica said as she reviewed Robert's evidence. "This man has been running a criminal enterprise for years, and nobody's tried to stop him," Robert said. "The state banking regulators either don't know or don't care. The local sheriff is probably one of his golf buddies. Someone needs to expose this." Jessica spent the next 2 months investigating Marcus's crimes. She interviewed victims, reviewed public records, and consulted with legal experts. She discovered that Marcus's schemes violated dozens of state and federal laws. She also found evidence that Marcus had bribed local officials to look the other way. The county assessor who helped undervalue properties before auctions. The state banking inspector who gave Marcus's bank clean reports despite obvious irregularities. Even the sheriff who had evicted families from their homes. But Jessica's most powerful sources were the victims themselves. She interviewed 23 families that Marcus had destroyed. Their stories were heartbreaking. There was Jim Watson, whose family had farmed the same land for 4 generations before Marcus stole it. Jim's elderly father had died of a heart attack the day they were evicted from their home. There was Maria Santos, a single mother who had inherited a small farm from her parents. Marcus had tricked her into signing a loan she could not read because her English was limited. She and her 3 children were now homeless. There was David Kim, a young veteran who had used his military benefits to buy a farm and start a new life. Marcus had stolen his land while David was deployed overseas serving his country. And there was Thomas Henderson, whose wife was dying while they lived in poverty, having lost everything to Marcus's greed. Jessica's article was published on a Sunday morning in October. The headline read, "Predator in a Suit: How a Small-Town Banker Stole Millions from Desperate Farmers." The article was devastating. It detailed Marcus's criminal schemes with precision and documented evidence. It included photographs of the victims and their families. It showed how Marcus had used his position of trust to prey on the most vulnerable people in the community. But most importantly, it included a recording of Marcus's own voice bragging about his crimes. The article went viral within hours. It was shared thousands of times on social media. Other newspapers picked up the story. Television news stations began calling for interviews. Marcus first learned about the article when his secretary called him at home that Sunday morning. "Mr. Rothwell, she said, her voice shaking. "Have you seen today's Tribune?" "No, why?" "You need to read it. Right away." Marcus drove to the gas station and bought a copy of the newspaper. When he saw the headline and his photograph on the front page, he felt like he was going to vomit. The article destroyed Marcus's reputation completely. It revealed him as a criminal who had stolen millions of dollars from families in crisis. It showed how he had lived in luxury while his victims suffered in poverty. By Monday morning, protesters had gathered outside Marcus's mansion. They carried signs with pictures of the families he had destroyed. They chanted thief and criminal. They demanded justice. Protesters also surrounded the bank. Customers closed their accounts and demanded their money. Local businesses announced they would no longer work with First National Bank. Marcus tried to go to work that Monday, but he could not even get into the building. The crowd of protesters was too large and too angry. Someone threw eggs at his car. Another person spit on his windshield. Marcus's phone rang constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Lawyers representing victims wanted to discuss lawsuits. Federal regulators wanted to schedule meetings. Marcus refused to talk to anyone. He hired an expensive lawyer and hid in his mansion, while the storm of public outrage grew stronger. But the worst was yet to come. Within a week of the article's publication, the FBI announced they were opening a criminal investigation into Marcus's activities. Federal banking regulators announced they were reviewing First National Bank's practices and considering taking control of the institution. The state attorney general announced that his office was filing criminal charges against Marcus for fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering, and the victims began filing lawsuits. Not just the farming families Marcus had cheated, but also the stockholders of First National Bank, who claimed Marcus had destroyed the value of their investments. Marcus's world was collapsing around him. The man who had seemed untouchable just weeks before was now facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. His wife was humiliated. She could not go to the grocery store without people staring and whispering. Her friends stopped calling. Her social clubs asked her to resign. Marcus's children were embarrassed and angry. His daughter, who was in college, found protesters on her campus demanding that the university return the scholarship money Marcus had donated. His son, who worked at a law firm, was asked to take a leave of absence because his presence was disruptive to firm business. The bank's board of directors held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to fire Marcus. They also voted to cooperate fully with all criminal investigations. Within 2 weeks of the article's publication, First National Bank was in serious financial trouble. So many customers had withdrawn their money that the bank was having trouble meeting its obligations. Federal regulators were threatening to seize control. Marcus watched all of this from his mansion, which was now surrounded by protesters and news crews 24 hours a day. He could not leave without being followed and harassed. The man who had once felt like the king of his small town was now a prisoner in his own home. But Marcus's real punishment was just beginning. The criminal investigation was uncovering evidence of crimes far worse than anyone had imagined. The lawsuits were threatening to take away every penny he had stolen and more. And Thomas Henderson, the man Marcus had destroyed 6 months earlier, was about to play a crucial role in bringing Marcus to justice. Thomas had read Jessica's article and recognized his own story in the details. For the first time since losing his farm, Thomas understood that what had happened to him was not bad luck or his own failure. It was a deliberate crime committed by a man who had made millions by destroying innocent families. Thomas called Jessica Martinez and volunteered to testify in any criminal trial. He also contacted the FBI and offered to help their investigation in any way he could. "I want to make sure this man can never hurt another family," Thomas told the FBI agent who interviewed him. "I want him to pay for what he did to all of us." The agent assured Thomas that Marcus would face justice. But Thomas wanted more than justice. He wanted to make sure that no other farming family would ever suffer the way his family had suffered. Thomas began working with other victims to organize support for stronger banking regulations. He started speaking at conferences and meetings, telling his story and advocating for laws that would protect farmers from predatory lending. While Marcus hid in his mansion, afraid to face the world, Thomas was finding his voice and his purpose. The man Marcus had tried to destroy was becoming the leader of a movement for justice. The wheel of karma was turning, and Marcus Rothwell was about to discover that every crime has consequences, even if those consequences take time to arrive. Marcus Rothwell could barely contain his excitement as he prepared for the farm auction. In just 3 weeks, he would own Thomas Henderson's farm for a fraction of its real value, then sell it to developers for an enormous profit. Everything was going exactly according to plan. The auction was scheduled for a Saturday morning at the county courthouse. By law, foreclosed properties had to be sold at public auction, giving anyone a chance to bid. But Marcus had no intention of letting this be a fair auction. Marcus had done this before. He knew exactly how to control an auction without breaking any laws. The key was to discourage other bidders before they even showed up. First, Marcus made sure the auction was advertised as little as possible. The legal notice appeared in the smallest print allowed by law, buried deep in the classified section of the local newspaper. Most people would never even see it. Second, Marcus spread rumors around town that the farm had serious problems. He told people the soil was contaminated. He said there were expensive environmental issues that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix. He claimed the water rights were disputed and tied up in court. None of this was true, but Marcus knew that rumors spread faster than facts in a small town. Third, Marcus used his connections to discourage serious bidders. When he heard that a neighboring farmer was interested in buying the land, Marcus called that farmer's bank and suggested they review his credit. Suddenly, the farmer could not get financing. When a local real estate investor started asking questions about the property, Marcus made sure word got back to the investor that the bank would not look kindly on anyone who bid against them. But Marcus's most effective tool was a network of fake bidders. These were shell companies that Marcus controlled, each with a different name and address. To anyone watching the auction, it would look like there were multiple bidders competing for the property. In reality, all the bidders would be working for Marcus. The plan was simple. Marcus's shell companies would bid against each other, driving the price up just enough to make it look legitimate. Then, at the last moment, all but one of the shell companies would drop out. The winning bidder would be a company called Heartland Development LLC, which was secretly owned by Marcus. Once Marcus owned the farm through Heartland Development, he would immediately sell it to the real developers for $800,000. The entire transaction would be completed within a week. On the morning of the auction, Marcus arrived at the courthouse early. He wore an expensive suit and drove his luxury car, wanting everyone to see how successful he was. He had even brought his wife, who was wearing a new diamond necklace that cost more than most people made in a year. Thomas Henderson was also at the auction, but he looked like a broken man. He stood at the back of the crowd wearing his old work clothes, watching as his family's legacy was about to be sold to strangers. Sarah was too sick to come. She was back in the hospital, fighting for her life while her husband watched their dreams being destroyed. The auctioneer called for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to auction the Henderson farm property. 200 acres of prime agricultural land, including a farmhouse, barn, and outbuildings. The minimum bid is $50,000, which is the amount owed to First National Bank." Marcus smiled. $50,000 was nothing for land worth at least 4 times that much. The auctioneer continued. "Do I hear 50,000? One of Marcus's fake bidders raised his hand. 50,000. "Do I hear 55? Another fake bidder responded. 55. 60. 65. The bidding continued, with Marcus's shell companies bidding against each other. To anyone watching, it looked like there was real competition for the property. The price slowly climbed. 70,000, 75,000, 80,000. Thomas watched in agony as strangers fought over his family's land like it was just another commodity. He recognized a few faces in the crowd. Some were local businessmen, others were people he did not know. What he did not realize was that most of the bidders were fake. At $90,000, the bidding slowed down. This was the signal for Marcus's shell companies to start dropping out one by one. "Do I hear 95? The auctioneer called. Only one fake bidder responded. 95. "Do I hear 100? Silence. Marcus held his breath. This was the moment when a real bidder might jump in and ruin everything. "Going once at 95,000, the auctioneer said. "Going twice at 95,000. Marcus looked around nervously. Was someone going to bid? Had his plan worked? Sold. To Heartland Development for $95,000. Marcus felt a rush of triumph. He had just bought land worth at least $300,000 for less than $100,000, and next week he would sell it for $800,000. His profit would be over $700,000. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus walked over to the auctioneer to finalize the paperwork. He tried to look businesslike and professional, but inside he was celebrating. Thomas approached Marcus as he was signing the documents. "Mr. Rothwell, I just want you to know that this farm has been in my family for 70 years. My grandfather built that barn with his own hands. My grandmother planted those apple trees. I hope whoever buys it from you will take care of it." Marcus looked at Thomas with fake sympathy. "I'm sure they will, Thomas. These things happen for a reason. Maybe this is a chance for you to start fresh." Thomas nodded sadly and walked away. He had no idea that Marcus had just stolen his farm for a fraction of its value. Within an hour of the auction, Marcus was on the phone with the developers. "The property is mine," he told them. "We can close on the sale next Friday." "Excellent," the developer said. "We'll have the $800,000 ready to transfer." Marcus hung up the phone and calculated his profit. He had bought the farm for $95,000. After paying off Thomas's original $50,000 loan, Marcus would clear $45,000 from the auction. Then he would sell the property for $800,000, making another $700,000 in profit. Total profit, $745,000. Not bad for a few months of work. That evening, Marcus took his wife out to the most expensive restaurant in the city. They ordered champagne and lobster. Marcus's wife admired her new diamond necklace in the restaurant's mirrors. "You seem very happy tonight," she said. "I am," Marcus replied. "I just closed a very profitable deal." "What kind of deal?" "Just some bank business. Nothing you need to worry about." Marcus's wife did not ask any more questions. She had learned long ago not to ask too many details about her husband's business dealings. She enjoyed the expensive lifestyle his success provided, and she did not want to know how he made his money. The next Friday, exactly 1 week after the auction, Marcus met with the developers to finalize the sale. The transaction took less than an hour. Marcus signed the deed transferring ownership of the farm to the development company. They signed a check transferring $800,000 to Marcus's personal account. By the time Thomas Henderson learned that his family's farm had been sold to developers, the bulldozers were already on the way. The developers planned to tear down the farmhouse, the barn, and all the other buildings. They would clear the apple trees and pave over the family cemetery. Within 6 months, there would be a shopping mall where Thomas's grandfather had once grown corn. Marcus used his profits to buy a new yacht and a vacation home in Florida. He also bought a new car for his wife and expanded his already large house. He felt like he was living the American dream, getting rich by being smarter than everyone else. But Marcus made one crucial mistake. He became overconfident. He started bragging about his success to other bankers at industry conferences. He told them how easy it was to make money off desperate farmers. He explained his system of predatory lending and controlled auctions. Marcus thought he was sharing business secrets with fellow professionals. What he did not realize was that some of those bankers were disgusted by his methods. Some of them had consciences. Some of them believed that banks should help communities, not destroy them. One of those bankers was named Robert Chen. Robert worked for a large regional bank, and he had grown up on a farm himself. When he heard Marcus bragging about cheating farmers, Robert was horrified. Robert started asking questions. He wanted to know how many farmers Marcus had cheated. He wanted to know how much money Marcus had made. He wanted to know if anyone was investigating these practices. Marcus was happy to answer. He was proud of his success. He told Robert about 12 different farmers he had cheated over the past 3 years. He explained how he had made millions of dollars in profit. He laughed about how easy it was to fool desperate people. Robert listened to everything Marcus said, and he remembered every detail. What Marcus did not know was that Robert Chen had a friend who worked as an investigative journalist for a major newspaper. Robert had been thinking about calling his friend for weeks, ever since he first heard about Marcus's practices. After hearing Marcus brag about destroying Thomas Henderson and 11 other farming families, Robert made his decision. This had to stop. The next morning, Robert called his friend at the newspaper. Thomas worked like a man possessed during those final weeks. He got up at 4 in the morning and worked until midnight, desperately trying to find money for his payment. He sold everything he could sell. He borrowed from neighbors who had little to spare. He even took bottles and cans to the recycling center for the few dollars they would bring. 3 days before his payment was due, Thomas finally got through to someone at the bank who could give him clear information. The loan officer told him he owed exactly $1,453.67. The payment was due by 5 o'clock on Friday, September 15th. Thomas counted his money again. Between the pawn shop money, what he had borrowed from neighbors, and every penny he could scrape together, he had $1,420. He was still $33.67 short. On Thursday, the day before his payment was due, Thomas swallowed his pride and called his brother in California. They had not spoken in 2 years because of an argument about their father's will. "David, it's Thomas," he said when his brother answered the phone. "Thomas, why are you calling?" "I need help. Sarah is sick and I'm about to lose the farm. I need to borrow $50. There was a long pause. "Thomas, you know I don't have much money. Kelly lost her job last month and we're struggling ourselves. Please, David, it's just $50. I'll pay you back as soon as I can." Another pause. "I'm sorry, Thomas." "I really am, but I can't help you right now." The line went dead. Thomas stared at the phone, feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. That night, Thomas could not sleep. He walked around the farm in the darkness, looking at everything his family had built. The barn his father had constructed with his own hands. The fence posts his grandfather had set in concrete. The apple trees his grandmother had planted as a young bride. All of it would be gone if he could not come up with $33.67. Friday morning came gray and cold. Thomas got dressed in his best clothes and drove to the bank. He hoped that Marcus would accept the partial payment and give him a few more days to find the rest. But when Thomas got to the bank, he was told that Marcus was not available. "He's in meetings all day," the receptionist said, "but you can make your payment with the teller." Thomas walked to the teller window and pulled out his envelope of money. "I need to make a loan payment," he said. The teller counted the money twice. "Sir, this is only $1,420. According to our records, you owe $1,453.67. "I know," Thomas said. "I'm a little short. Can you accept this as a partial payment? I'll have the rest in a few days." The teller looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir. Our policy is that we cannot accept partial payments on this type of loan. You need to pay the full amount." "But it's only $33, Thomas said. "Surely the bank can work with me for $33. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't make the rules." Thomas felt panic rising in his chest. "Please, can I speak to Mr. Rothwell? He'll understand." "Mr. Rothwell is not available, but I can have a loan officer speak with you." Thomas waited for 20 minutes before a young man came out to talk to him. The loan officer looked at Thomas's file and shook his head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson. The contract is very clear. Full payment is required by 5 o'clock today, or the bank has the right to begin foreclosure proceedings." "But it's just $33, Thomas repeated. "I understand your frustration, but the bank has to follow the contract. Maybe you can find the money somewhere else." Thomas left the bank feeling defeated. He had 4 hours to find $33.67, or he would lose everything. He drove through town, stopping at every business, asking if anyone had work he could do for quick cash. He offered to clean gutters, wash windows, sweep floors. Most people said no. A few felt sorry for him and gave him small jobs. But by 4 o'clock he had only earned $18 more. At 4:30, Thomas was still $15 short. He sat in his truck outside the bank, staring at the money in his hands. So close, so very close. At 5 minutes before 5, Thomas walked back into the bank with his partial payment. Maybe they would show mercy. Maybe they would understand that he was trying his best. But the same loan officer shook his head again. "I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson. Without the full payment, I cannot help you." At exactly 5 o'clock, the bank doors closed. Thomas stood outside on the sidewalk holding his money, knowing that his life had just changed forever. That weekend was the longest of Thomas's life. He kept hoping the phone would ring, hoping that Marcus would call and say there had been a mistake, that the bank would give him another chance. But Monday morning, the phone finally did ring. It was not Marcus. It was a lawyer. "Mr. Henderson, this is Attorney Johnson from the bank's legal department." I'm calling to inform you that foreclosure proceedings on your property will begin immediately. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. 72 hours? Thomas said. But I was only 3 days late with my payment. Sir, according to the contract you signed, any late payment triggers immediate foreclosure. I'm sorry, but you need to be out by Thursday. Thomas hung up the phone and told Sarah what had happened. She was in bed, too weak from her latest treatment to even sit up. Maybe it's for the best, she whispered. We can move to town, get a small apartment, start over. But Thomas could not accept it. This was his family's land. His grandfather had bled and sweated for this farm. His father had given his whole life to it. Thomas could not just walk away. On Tuesday morning, Thomas drove to the bank one more time. He demanded to see Marcus. I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson, the receptionist said. Mr. Rothwell is not available. Then I'll wait, Thomas said, sitting down in the lobby. Thomas waited for 3 hours. Finally, Marcus came out of his office, but instead of looking sympathetic, Marcus looked annoyed. Thomas, you need to leave. There's nothing more to discuss. Please, Marcus. I was only 3 days late, and only by $33. Can we work something out? Marcus shook his head. Thomas, a contract is a contract. You signed an agreement and you failed to live up to it. The bank has to protect its interests. My wife is dying, Thomas said, his voice breaking. This farm is all we have. I'm sorry about Sarah's illness, Marcus said. But that doesn't change the legal situation. You need to be out by Thursday. As Thomas left the bank for the last time, Marcus felt a moment of guilt. Thomas really was a good man who had just had bad luck. But business was business. Marcus had already talked to the developers. They were excited about buying the farm. Marcus stood to make over $700,000 from this deal. That guilt passed quickly when Marcus thought about the new yacht he was going to buy with the money. On Wednesday night, Thomas could not sleep. He walked around the farm one last time, saying goodbye to everything. The barn where he had played as a child, the creek where he had taught his nephew to fish, the hill where his grandparents were buried. At dawn on Thursday morning, the sheriff's deputies arrived. They were polite but firm. Thomas and Sarah had to leave. Now, Thomas helped Sarah into their old car. She was so weak she could barely walk. They had packed what little they could carry. Everything else would stay with the farm. As they drove away, Thomas looked in his rearview mirror and saw Marcus Rothwell's expensive car pulling into the driveway. Marcus had come to inspect his new property. Sarah collapsed at her sister's house that afternoon. The stress of losing their home had been too much for her weakened body. The ambulance rushed her to the hospital where the doctors said her condition was critical. Thomas sat beside her hospital bed holding her hand, wondering how his life had fallen apart so completely. 3 days ago he had been a landowner, a farmer, a man with roots going back 3 generations. Now he was homeless, jobless, and watching his wife die. But Thomas still did not understand what had really happened to him. He thought he had been the victim of bad luck and an unforgiving banking system. He had no idea that Marcus Rothwell had deliberately orchestrated his destruction. That night, as Sarah fought for her life in the hospital, Marcus was at an expensive restaurant celebrating. He raised a glass of champagne and smiled. By next week, he would be $700,000 richer. Marcus had no idea that his celebration was premature. He had no idea that his carefully planned scheme was about to unravel in ways he could never imagine. He had no idea that the man he had just destroyed would eventually become the instrument of his own destruction. But that was still to come. For now, Marcus felt like he had won everything and Thomas felt like he had lost everything. Neither man knew that the story was far from over. Marcus Rothwell had perfected the art of destroying people while appearing to help them. The contract Thomas signed was just the beginning. Now Marcus had to make sure Thomas would fail, no matter how hard he tried to succeed. The first step was already in motion. Marcus had deliberately made the payment schedule confusing. Instead of simple monthly payments, the contract required payments every 28 days. This meant that sometimes 2 payments would be due in the same month. Most people would not notice this until it was too late. But Marcus was not taking any chances. He had other plans to make sure Thomas would fail. The day after Thomas signed the contract, Marcus called his friend Janet Mills at the Agricultural Insurance Office. Janet owed Marcus several favors. 2 years ago, Marcus had approved a loan for Janet's son to buy a house, even though the boy's credit was terrible. Janet, I need you to do something for me, Marcus said when she answered the phone. What do you need, Marcus? A farmer named Thomas Henderson is going to apply for emergency crop insurance funding. When he does, I need you to reject his application. What's the reason for rejection? Janet asked. Make something up. Say his paperwork is incomplete. Say he missed a deadline. I don't care what you say, just make sure he doesn't get the money. Janet was quiet for a moment. Marcus, that doesn't seem right. If he qualifies for the insurance money. Janet, Marcus interrupted, his voice becoming cold. Do you remember when your son needed that house loan? Do you remember how I helped you when no other bank would? Yes, but then you'll help me now. Unless you want me to take another look at that loan. I might discover that we made a mistake, Janet sighed. Fine, I'll reject his application. Good, and Janet? Make sure the rejection takes a long time. Don't tell him no right away. String him along for a few weeks. Marcus hung up the phone, feeling satisfied. That was one potential source of money eliminated. Next, Marcus called his contact at the county agricultural office. The county had a disaster relief program that gave emergency grants to farmers who had been hurt by the drought. Thomas would probably apply for this grant too. Hello, Rick. It's Marcus Rothwell. I need you to delay processing an application for me. What kind of delay are you talking about? Rick asked. A farmer named Thomas Henderson will probably apply for drought relief funding. When he does, I need you to sit on his application for at least 6 weeks. 6 weeks? That's a long time, Marcus. These farmers really need this money. Rick, your daughter works at my bank, doesn't she? Nice girl. It would be a shame if we had to let her go because of budget cuts. Rick got the message. I'll see what I can do. I knew you'd understand. Marcus made 3 more phone calls that day. He called the equipment rental company where Thomas might try to rent cheaper farming equipment. He called the grain elevator where Thomas would try to sell any crops he managed to grow. He called the feed store where Thomas bought supplies for his few remaining animals. To each one, Marcus gave the same message. Do not give Thomas Henderson any credit. Do not give him any deals. Make everything as difficult as possible. Marcus had spent years building these relationships. Bank presidents had power in small towns. They could approve or deny loans for local businesses. They could help someone succeed or destroy them completely. Marcus had learned to use this power to get what he wanted. While Marcus was making his phone calls, Thomas was at home trying to figure out how to make his first payment. He had 28 days to come up with $1,200. That was the monthly payment plus the new higher interest rate. Thomas decided to apply for the emergency crop insurance money. Even though his crops had failed, the insurance program was supposed to help farmers who lost money because of weather disasters. He drove to the agricultural insurance office and filled out the application. How long will this take? Thomas asked Janet Mills. Oh, these applications can take a while to process, Janet said, not looking Thomas in the eyes. Maybe 4 to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks? Thomas said. But my payment is due in less than a month. Janet shrugged. I'm sorry, but that's just how long it takes. Government paperwork, you know. Thomas left the office feeling worried. He had been hoping to get the insurance money quickly. Now he would have to find another way to make his first payment. Next, Thomas went to the county agricultural office to apply for drought relief funding. This was a grant program, which meant he would not have to pay the money back. I need to apply for emergency drought assistance, Thomas told the clerk. Okay, fill out these forms, the clerk said, handing him a thick stack of papers. When you're done, we'll get these processed. How long does it usually take? Thomas asked. Normally about 2 weeks, the clerk said, but we're pretty backed up right now. Could be longer. Thomas filled out the forms and turned them in. As he was leaving, the clerk handed the forms to Rick, who immediately put them in a drawer instead of the processing pile. Thomas did not know it, but his application would sit in that drawer for weeks. Desperate for money, Thomas decided to try to get a part-time job in town. He applied at the hardware store, the grocery store, and the auto repair shop. But every place he applied, the answer was the same. I'm sorry, Thomas, but we're not hiring right now. We just filled our last position. Maybe try again in a few months. Thomas did not know that Marcus had called ahead to each of these places. Marcus had not directly told them not to hire Thomas. He had been more subtle than that. Just wanted to let you know that Thomas Henderson might be applying for a job, Marcus had said. He's having some financial troubles. His farm is probably going to be foreclosed soon. might not be the most reliable employee. In a small town, a banker's opinion carried a lot of weight. If Marcus Rothwell said someone was a bad risk, people listened. As the days passed, Thomas grew more desperate. He tried to sell some of his farming equipment, but the dealers offered him much less than the equipment was worth. He tried to get a loan from other banks, but they all said he already owed too much money. Meanwhile, Sarah's condition was getting worse. The cancer treatments were not working as well as the doctors had hoped. She spent most days in bed, too weak to help with anything. Thomas had to take care of her, manage the farm, and somehow find a way to make money. 2 weeks before his first payment was due, Thomas called the bank to ask about the payment schedule. He wanted to make sure he understood exactly when the money was due and how much he owed. "I need to speak to someone about my loan payment," Thomas told the receptionist. "Mr. Rothwell is in meetings all day," she said. "Can someone else help you?" Thomas was transferred to a loan officer named Dave, but Dave seemed confused about Thomas's loan. "Let me look this up," Dave said. I'm seeing some conflicting information here. Let me check with Mr. Rothwell and get back to you." Dave never called back. Thomas called again the next day. This time he was told that Mr. Rothwell was out of town. The day after that, he was told that Mr. Rothwell was sick. The day after that, he was told that Mr. Rothwell was in important meetings and could not be disturbed. What Thomas did not know was that Marcus was deliberately avoiding his calls. Every time Thomas called, the receptionist would put him on hold and then transfer him to different people who would give him different information. "Your payment is due on the 15th, one person told him. "No, I think it's due on the 20th, another person said. "Let me check. Actually, I think there might be an additional fee you need to pay." This was all part of Marcus's plan. Keep Thomas confused. Give him wrong information. Make it impossible for him to know exactly what he owed or when it was due. Meanwhile, the applications Thomas had submitted were being deliberately delayed. His crop insurance application sat on Janet's desk, marked pending review. His drought relief application sat in Rick's drawer, forgotten. Thomas had no idea that he was fighting against a system designed to make him fail. He thought he was just having bad luck. He thought the delays were normal government bureaucracy. He thought the confusing information from the bank was just poor communication. He had no idea that Marcus Rothwell was orchestrating his destruction step by step. With 1 week left before his payment was due, Thomas made a desperate decision. He would sell his grandfather's watch, his father's wedding ring, and Sarah's engagement ring. Even Sarah's wedding ring, which he had promised never to sell. The jewelry was not worth much, but it might be enough to make his first payment. Thomas drove to the pawn shop in the next town over, hoping that no one he knew would see him there. As he handed over his family's treasures to a stranger, Thomas felt like he was betraying everyone who had come before him. But what choice did he have? He walked out of the pawn shop with $800. It was not enough to make his full payment, but maybe Marcus would accept a partial payment and give him more time. Thomas had no idea that Marcus was already planning to reject any partial payment. The contract Thomas had signed specifically said that partial payments were not acceptable. Miss the full amount by even $1 and the bank could take everything. As Thomas drove home with $800 in his pocket, Marcus was in his office, smiling. Everything was going exactly according to plan. Marcus Rothwell sat behind his big oak desk and smiled when he heard that Thomas Henderson was waiting to see him. Marcus had been expecting this visit for weeks. He had been watching Thomas's account very carefully. He knew exactly how much money Thomas owed. He knew exactly when the payments were due, and he knew that Thomas could not pay. This was exactly what Marcus had been waiting for. Marcus was not like the other bank presidents in small towns. He was not interested in helping farmers or supporting the community. Marcus only cared about one thing: making money for himself. And he had discovered that desperate farmers were the perfect way to make a lot of money very quickly. The plan was simple. Wait for a farmer to get into trouble. Offer them a loan. That seemed helpful but was actually impossible to pay back. When they failed to make the payments, take their land. Sell the land to developers for much more money than the farmer owed. Keep the extra money. Marcus had done this 12 times in the past 3 years. Each time he had made hundreds of thousands of dollars. The farmers always trusted him because he seemed so nice and helpful. They never realized what was really happening until it was too late. Thomas Henderson's farm was going to be Marcus's biggest score yet. That land was worth at least 3 times what Thomas owed the bank. Marcus had already talked to developers who wanted to build a shopping mall there. They were willing to pay $800,000 for the property. Thomas only owed $50,000. That meant Marcus could make $750,000 in profit. Marcus straightened his expensive tie and told his secretary to send Thomas in. He practiced his sympathetic smile in the reflection of his computer screen. He had to look like he cared about Thomas's problems. Thomas walked into the office looking nervous and uncomfortable. His clothes were clean but old. His hands were rough from years of farm work. Marcus almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Thomas," Marcus said, standing up and reaching across the desk to shake hands. "Good to see you. Please sit down. Can I get you some coffee?" "No, thank you," Thomas said, sitting down in the chair across from Marcus's desk. "I appreciate you seeing me without an appointment." "Of course," Marcus said, sitting back down. "We're always here to help our customers. Now what can I do for you?" Thomas took a deep breath. "I got your letter about my loan, the one that says I have to pay everything back in 60 days. Mr. Rothwell, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have the money right now. My wife is sick and the medical bills have been terrible, and the drought has killed my crops for 3 years running. I'm asking if the bank can give me more time." Marcus nodded and tried to look concerned. "Oh, Thomas, I'm so sorry to hear about Sarah. How is she doing?" "She's fighting hard," Thomas said. "The doctors say the treatments are working, but it's been rough." "I can only imagine," Marcus said. "And this drought has been just devastating for our farming community. You're not the only one who's been struggling." Thomas felt a little hope. Marcus seemed to understand his situation. Maybe this would work out after all. "Now," Marcus continued, "let me pull up your file and see what we can do." He turned to his computer and pretended to look at Thomas's information, even though he already knew every detail by heart. Marcus said, frowning at the screen. "I see the problem. You borrowed $50,000 against your farm 18 months ago. The original agreement was for monthly payments of $1,500, but you've missed several payments." "I know," Thomas said. "But like I said with Sarah's medical bills—" "Oh, I understand completely," Marcus interrupted. "And normally, in a situation like this, we would just foreclose immediately, take the farm and sell it to recover our money." Thomas felt his heart stop. "Please, Mr. Rothwell, that farm is all I have. It's been in my family for 70 years. Marcus held up his hand. "Wait, let me finish. I said that's what we would normally do. But I like you, Thomas. You've been a customer here for a long time. You're a good man who's just had some bad luck, so I want to help you." Thomas felt relief wash over him. "Thank you. I really appreciate that." "Here's what I can do," Marcus said, pulling out a thick stack of papers. "I can give you a 3-month extension on your loan. That will give you time to get back on your feet." 3 months? Thomas said. "I was hoping for maybe a year to give me time to plant and harvest a crop." Marcus shook his head sadly. "I wish I could do that, Thomas. But the bank's board of directors has very strict rules about extensions. 3 months is the most I can offer." Thomas thought about it. 3 months was not very long, but maybe he could figure something out. Maybe he could get a job in town. Maybe Sarah's insurance would finally pay some of the medical bills. "What would the terms be?" Thomas asked. Marcus smiled. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "Well, because we're taking on additional risk by extending the loan, we'll need to charge a higher interest rate, 18%. 18%, Thomas said. "That's very high." "I know it seems high," Marcus said. "But remember, this is an emergency loan to help you out of a difficult situation, and 18% is actually quite reasonable for this type of high-risk lending." Thomas did not know much about interest rates, but 18% sounded like a lot. Still, what choice did he have? "There is one other condition," Marcus said, sliding the papers across the desk. "Because of the increased risk, we'll need to add a clause that allows the bank to seize the property immediately if you miss even one payment. No grace period, no second chances. Miss one payment by even 1 day, and we take the farm." Thomas stared at the papers. The words were all in legal language that he did not understand. "This seems pretty strict," he said. "I know it looks scary," Marcus said in his most reassuring voice. "But Thomas, this clause is just a formality. It's something the lawyers make us put in all these contracts. I have no intention of using it. You're going to make your payments and everything will be fine. In 3 months, hopefully Sarah will be feeling better and you'll be back on your feet." Marcus leaned forward and looked Thomas in the eyes. "Thomas, I want to see you succeed. The bank wants to see you succeed. We're not in the business of taking people's farms. We're in the business of helping our community." Thomas wanted to believe him. Marcus seemed so sincere, so concerned about Thomas's welfare. And what choice did he have? If he did not sign this agreement, the bank would take his farm in 60 days anyway. "Can I take these papers home and read them over?" Thomas asked. Marcus looked at his watch. "Unfortunately, this offer is only good today. Tomorrow the bank's board meets and they might not approve this extension. If you want my help, you need to sign today." Thomas felt pressure building in his chest. This was all happening so fast. But he thought about Sarah at home, worried about their future. He thought about his grandfather's grave on the hill behind the house. He thought about losing everything his family had worked for. "Okay," Thomas said. "I'll sign." Marcus handed him a pen and pointed to several places in the contract where Thomas needed to sign. Thomas signed his name without reading the fine print. He trusted Marcus to keep his word. "Excellent," Marcus said, gathering up the papers. "You're doing the right thing, Thomas. This will give you the breathing room you need." Thomas stood up and shook Marcus's hand. "Thank you, Mr. Rothwell. I really appreciate you working with me." "It's my pleasure," Marcus said. "We're here to help." As Thomas left the bank, he felt a mixture of relief and worry. He had bought himself 3 months, but the terms were tough. He would have to find a way to make those payments no matter what. Marcus watched Thomas drive away through his office window. Then he picked up his phone and called his lawyer. "It's done," Marcus said. "Henderson signed the papers. Start getting the foreclosure documents ready, and call those developers. Tell them the Henderson farm will be available in 3 months." Marcus hung up and smiled. Thomas Henderson had no idea what he had just signed, but Marcus knew exactly what those papers said. Hidden in the legal language were clauses that would make it impossible for Thomas to succeed. The payment schedule was designed to be confusing. The interest calculations were deliberately complicated. And if Thomas was even 1 day late with any payment, Marcus could take everything. Thomas thought he had found a lifeline. But Marcus had just handed him a rope that was tied into a noose. Thomas Henderson woke up before the sun came up, just like he had done every day for the past 30 years. But this morning felt different. This morning he could not shake the heavy feeling in his chest. He looked out his bedroom window at the dry fields that stretched as far as he could see. The corn that should have been tall and green was brown and dying. The earth was cracked like old leather. He walked downstairs quietly, trying not to wake his wife, Sarah. She needed all the sleep she could get these days. The cancer treatments made her so tired that some days she could barely get out of bed. Thomas made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table where his grandfather used to sit. The same table where his father had planned each farming season. The same table where Thomas had dreamed of passing the farm to his own children. But now those dreams seemed impossible. Thomas pulled out a stack of papers from a wooden box. Bills. So many bills. The electric company wanted $800. The feed store wanted $1,200. The equipment repair shop wanted $2,000. And the worst one of all, the hospital bill for Sarah's treatment. $43,000. The number made his hands shake every time he looked at it. He had been farming this land since he was 18 years old. His grandfather had bought these 200 acres back in 1952, with money he saved from working in the coal mines. His father had worked the same fields, growing corn and soybeans, raising cattle and pigs. The farm had always provided enough for the family to live on. Not rich, but comfortable. Enough to fix the roof when it leaked. Enough to buy new boots when the old ones wore out. Enough to put food on the table every night. But 3 years ago, everything started to change. First came the drought. The worst drought anyone could remember. For 3 summers in a row, the rain just stopped coming. Thomas watched his crops die in the fields. He watched his ponds dry up. He had to sell most of his cattle because there was no grass for them to eat and no money to buy feed. Then Sarah got sick. It started with just feeling tired all the time. Then came the pain in her stomach. The doctors ran test after test. Finally, they found it. Cancer. The word hit Thomas like a truck. Sarah was only 52 years old. They had been married for 28 years. She was supposed to grow old with him on this farm. The treatments were expensive, very expensive. Even with insurance, the bills kept coming. The insurance company seemed to find reasons not to pay for everything. They said this treatment was not necessary. They said that medicine was too expensive. They said the hospital charged too much. Meanwhile, Sarah got sicker and sicker. Thomas had used up all their savings in the first year. In the second year, he sold his father's old truck and his grandfather's antique tractor. He sold Sarah's jewelry, even her wedding ring, though she told him not to. In the third year, he borrowed money against the farm itself. Now he owed the bank $50,000. And he had no way to pay it back. The bank had sent him a letter last week. It was written in fancy words that Thomas had trouble understanding, but the meaning was clear. Pay the money in 60 days or lose the farm. 60 days. That was not enough time to grow a crop and sell it. That was not enough time to find a job that paid enough. That was not enough time to save his family's legacy. Thomas heard footsteps on the stairs. Sarah came down slowly, holding onto the railing. She looked so thin now. The treatments had made all her beautiful hair fall out. But when she smiled at him, she was still the same girl he had fallen in love with in high school. "You're up early," she said, sitting down next to him at the table. "Could not sleep," Thomas said. He tried to hide the bills, but Sarah had already seen them. "It's bad, isn't it?" she asked. Thomas nodded. He could not lie to her. They had never lied to each other in 28 years of marriage. "Maybe we should just sell the farm," Sarah said quietly. "We could move to town. Get a small apartment. I could get a job when I feel better." "No," Thomas said firmly. "This is our home. This is where we belong. Your grandfather is buried in that cemetery over the hill. My father built that barn with his own hands. I am not giving up." But even as he said the words, Thomas felt doubt creeping into his heart. What choice did he have? The drought had destroyed 3 years of crops. Sarah's medical bills had destroyed their savings. The bank wanted their money and Thomas did not have it. He thought about his neighbor, Jim Watson. Jim had been in the same situation 2 years ago. Jim had gone to the bank asking for help. The bank president, a man named Marcus Rothwell, had seemed very understanding. He had given Jim a loan extension. But then, just 3 months later, the bank had taken Jim's farm anyway. Jim and his family had moved away. Nobody knew where they went. Thomas had heard other stories too. Stories about other farmers who had trusted Marcus Rothwell and lost everything. But what choice did Thomas have? He could not let his family become homeless. He could not let Sarah worry about money while she was fighting for her life. That afternoon, Thomas drove his old pickup truck into town. The bank was on Main Street, a big brick building with tall windows and a sign that said First National Bank in gold letters. Thomas had been inside many times over the years. He had opened his first checking account there when he got married. He had borrowed money to buy new equipment. The bank had always been friendly before, but now, walking through those doors, Thomas felt like he was walking into a trap. The lobby was cool and quiet. Expensive furniture and paintings on the walls. A young woman at the front desk smiled at him. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I need to see Mr. Rothwell," Thomas said. "About my loan. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I really need to talk to him." "It's important." The woman made a phone call. She spoke quietly so Thomas could not hear what she was saying. Finally, she hung up and smiled again. "Mr. Rothwell can see you in a few minutes. Please have a seat." Thomas sat down in a leather chair that was probably worth more than he made in a month. He looked at the magazines on the table. Business magazines with pictures of rich men in expensive suits. This was not his world. This was not where he belonged, but he had no choice. His family's survival depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Thomas said a silent prayer that Marcus Rothwell would be understanding. That he would see that Thomas was a good man who had just had some bad luck. That he would give him the time he needed to save his farm. Thomas had no idea that Marcus Rothwell was already planning to destroy him.